The human body is a miraculous, fragile thing. It is designed to pump blood, draw breath, and process the world through 5 basic senses. When the advent of the glowing baby in Ching City heralded the dawn of Quirks, human biology was forced to adapt. Toes lost their joints, muscles hardened, and the brain rewired itself to accommodate fire, ice, telekinesis, and a million other impossibilities. But evolution is a slow, methodical process. It builds bridges one stone at a time. It does not drop the entire weight of the universe onto the shoulders of a 4-year-old boy and expect him to stand. The waiting room of Dr. Tsubasa's pediatric clinic smelled strongly of antiseptic and stale lavender. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat swinging his legs, staring at the floor tiles. He was wearing his favorite All Might t-shirt, the one with the Silver Age cape printed on the back. Beside him, Inko Midoriya nervously twisted the strap of her purse. Most children came to this clinic to discover if they would breathe fire, pull objects, or perhaps possess something flashy and heroic. Inko just wanted to know why her son hadn't slept in 3 weeks, and why, when he cried, the light bulbs in their apartment shattered into glittering dust. Izuku, sweetie, Inko whispered, brushing a hand through his unruly green curls. Are you feeling dizzy again? Izuku looked up. His massive, emerald eyes were bloodshot, ringed with heavy, dark bags that belonged on a seasoned war veteran, not a toddler. He didn't answer her out loud. Instead, Inko heard a small, frightened voice echo directly behind her eyes, reverberating against her own skull. It's too loud, Mommy. The walls are singing. Inko suppressed a shiver, forcing a warm, trembling smile. The doctor will see us soon, baby. I promise. When Dr. Tsubasa finally called them in, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The doctor, usually a jovial, round-faced man with a thick mustache and goggles, looked pale. He sat at his desk, staring at a series of X-rays mounted on the glowing light board. He didn't look at Inko when they entered. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scans. Dr. Tsubasa? Inko asked, taking a seat and pulling Izuku into her lap. Are the results back? Is it a telepathy quirk? Or telekinesis? My husband breathes fire, and I can pull small objects, so we thought. Mrs. Midoriya, the doctor interrupted. His voice was entirely devoid of its usual bedside manner. It sounded hollow. He slowly turned in his chair. I have been practicing quirk genetics for 40 years. I have seen mutations. I have seen amalgamations. I have seen the human genome bend in ways that defy the laws of physics. He pointed a trembling finger at the X-ray. It was a scan of Izuku's chest and skull. But it wasn't a normal X-ray. The bones were barely visible. Instead, the entire skin was illuminated by a blinding, chaotic web of branching, fractal lines that seemed to shift and pulse even on the static film. It looked like a photograph of a dying star. A quirk is a biological function, Dr. Tsubasa continued, pulling at his collar as if he were suddenly suffocating. It is localized. A specialized organ, a specific neural pathway. Your son does not have a quirk factor. Inko's heart plummeted. He's quirkless? No, Tsubasa breathed out, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto the small green-haired boy. He is all of them. Silence stretched across the room, thick and suffocating. I don't understand, Inko stammered. His DNA is in a state of perpetual, hyper-accelerated mutation, the doctor explained, frantically grabbing a pen and drawing erratic circles on a notepad. Every quirk that has ever been recorded in the global registry, emission, transformation, mutant types, their genetic blueprints are constantly rewriting themselves into his cells. It's a phenomenon that shouldn't be biologically possible. It's an omni-singularity. He holds the genetic potential of the entire human race. As the doctor spoke, his panic began to spike. Izuku, sitting quietly on his mother's lap, suddenly whimpered. He gripped his head with both hands. Loud, Izuku whimpered, not just in Inko's mind this time, but in the doctor's mind as well. The man is scared. Heart goes thump thump thump. Fast. Too fast. Izuku? Inko gasped. The room's gravity suddenly inverted. The jar of tongue depressors on the desk floated upward, spilling like wooden rain toward the ceiling. The doctor's rolling stool lifted off the linoleum. Inko felt her own hair stand on end as a localized electromagnetic field crackled to life around her son's small body. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. A tiny, panicked hiccup escaped his throat. When his mouth opened, a plume of searing, cobalt blue fire erupted, scorching the ceiling tiles. Simultaneously, the temperature in the room plummeted to sub-zero, frosting the windows with thick layers of ice. "Make it stop!" Izuku cried out, his voice distorted, layered with a bizarre, mechanical reverberation. He was floating now, suspended 3 feet in the air, his small hands clutching his temples. The air around him warped and shimmered with kinetic energy. The sheer sensory overload, hearing the doctor's racing heartbeat, feeling the magnetic pull of the Earth's poles, seeing ultraviolet and infrared light, tasting the chemical composition of the air, was tearing his fragile 4-year-old mind apart. "Doctor, do something!" Inko screamed, reaching for her floating son. The moment her fingers brushed his arm, a shockwave of raw, unfocused energy blasted through the room, blowing the reinforced glass windows outward into the street, and sending Dr. Tsubasa crashing into his filing cabinets. Izuku fell to the floor, gasping for air, the erratic burst of powers abruptly shutting down as his body initiated a trauma-induced failsafe. He passed out, his small chest heaving, blood trickling from both of his nostrils. Inko dropped to her knees, pulling the unconscious boy into her arms, weeping as the frost melted off the walls and the smell of ozone filled the destroyed clinic. Dr. Tsubasa groaned, pulling himself up from the debris. He looked at the boy, his eyes wide with a terror that would haunt him until the end of his days. "Mrs. Midoriya," the doctor whispered, his voice trembling. "You need to hide him. If the world finds out what he is, they won't treat him like a boy. They will treat him like a god. Or a weapon." Growing up with a god in the house is a quiet, terrifying affair. By the time Izuku was 5 years old, Inko had padded every wall in his bedroom with soundproofing foam. She had covered the windows with blackout curtains to mitigate the visual input that sometimes triggered his ocular quirks. She stopped inviting other mothers over for tea. Izuku, despite the horrific burden of his own biology, remained a profoundly gentle child. He was not prone to tantrums. In fact, he was terrified of his own emotions. He learned very early on that if he got angry, the kitchen knives would levitate and embed themselves in the walls. If he got too excited watching an All Might cartoon, his skin would harden into organic diamond, crushing the television remote into dust. Because of this, Izuku developed a hypervigilant, deeply anxious personality. He existed in a state of constant self-policing. He spoke softly. He moved slowly. He walked as if the ground beneath him were made of rice paper. Yet he was still a child. And children needed to play. It was a humid afternoon in mid-July. Izuku was wandering through the dense, lush woods near his neighborhood, trailing a few paces behind Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was everything Izuku wasn't: loud, brash, confident, and entirely in control of his power. Katsuki had recently manifested his explosion quirk, and he was eager to show it off to the neighborhood kids, who followed him like ducklings. "Keep up, Deku!" Katsuki shouted, blasting a small explosion from his palm to swat away a large cicada. "If you fall behind, I'm not coming back for you." "I'm coming, Kaken," Izuku said softly, carefully stepping over a protruding tree root. He was focusing very hard on not using the levitation quirk he felt bubbling at the base of his spine. "You're so slow," Katsuki scoffed, turning around and putting his hands on his hips. He smirked, sparks popping off his fingers like miniature fireworks. "It's 'cause you haven't got your quirk yet, huh? The doctor said you had something, but you haven't done anything cool. Just weird stuff." I have a quirk, Kaken," Izuku murmured, looking at the dirt. "My mom just says I shouldn't use it. It's a bit dangerous." Katsuki laughed, a harsh, abrasive sound. "Dangerous? You! Don't make me laugh, Deku! Nothing's more dangerous than me. Watch this." Katsuki turned toward a thick, decaying oak tree. He pulled his right arm back, letting sweat pool in his palms, and thrust it forward. Boom! A fiery explosion erupted, blasting a chunk of bark off the tree and leaving a blackened, smoldering crater in the wood. The other children cheered, clapping their hands in awe. "See that?" Katsuki grinned, turning back to Izuku with triumphant, crimson eyes. That's the power of the future #1 hero, Izuku smiled weakly. That's amazing, Kaken. As Izuku spoke, a stray gust of wind blew a cluster of dandelion seeds directly into his face. Izuku's nose twitched. He inhaled sharply. Immediately Izuku felt the warning signs. A spike of panic shot through his chest. When a normal person sneezes, it is a sudden, involuntary expulsion of air. But Izuku's biology didn't just expel air. The involuntary muscular contraction triggered a domino effect within his terrifying genetic vault. A kinetic amplification quirk synced with an air cannon quirk. A vibration generation quirk intertwined with a shockwave quirk. Oh no, Izuku thought, his eyes widening in pure terror. He desperately tried to clamp his hands over his mouth, turning his head away from Katsuki and the other children, aiming his face toward the deep, uninhabited expanse of the forest. Achoo! It didn't sound like a sneeze. It sounded like the detonation of a tactical cruise missile. The air in front of Izuku condensed into a visible, rippling sphere of white-hot pressure. Then it snapped. A concussive wave of absolute, catastrophic force erupted from his small body. The sound was deafening, a booming, earth-shattering roar that blew out the eardrums of the cicadas for miles. The blast radius was shaped like a massive cone. The decaying oak tree Katsuki had just punched was instantly vaporized into sawdust. But it didn't stop there. The shockwave tore through the forest, ripping 100-year-old pine trees out of the soil by their roots. Boulders were pulverized into gravel. The very earth was scoured clean, leaving a massive, V-shaped trench of flattened, smoking destruction that extended for over a mile into the horizon. The violent backdraft knocked all the children off their feet, sending them tumbling into the dirt. When the dust finally settled, a horrifying, deathly silence fell over the woods. Izuku stood frozen, trembling violently. He lowered his hands from his face. Before him was not a forest, but a barren, apocalyptic wasteland of splintered wood and displaced earth. The sky was entirely visible where a thick canopy of leaves had been just seconds before. He slowly turned his head, tears welling up in his massive green eyes. I'm sorry. I had a tickle in my nose. He looked at Katsuki. The blonde boy was sitting in the dirt, his legs splayed out in front of him. Katsuki's jaw was slack. His crimson eyes were blown wide, pupils dilated in absolute, unfiltered horror. He looked from the mile-long trench of devastation back to the small, crying, green-haired boy. Katsuki Bakugo's entire worldview, his superiority, his belief that his explosions made him a god among men, his destiny to be the strongest, shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that single, agonizing moment. He wasn't looking at a rival. He was looking at a natural disaster wrapped in human skin. Katsuki didn't scream. He didn't yell at Izuku. He slowly pushed himself backward, crab-walking through the dirt to get away from the boy, his breath hitching in his throat. The fear in Katsuki's eyes was profound, primal, and deeply scarring. From that day on, the dynamic between them inverted completely. Katsuki never called him Deku again. He never bullied him. In fact, Katsuki went out of his way to never, ever be in the same room as Izuku if he could help it. There was no mockery. There was only a quiet, simmering terror, and an agonizing, desperate need to grow strong enough so that he wouldn't feel like an insect standing next to the sun. Izuku lost his childhood friend that day. Not because he was weak, but because he was a monster. By the time Izuku Midoriya was 14 years old, he had mastered the art of being invisible. The morning routine was always the hardest. Izuku lay in his bed, staring at his ceiling. He didn't move. He couldn't move. Every morning, between the state of sleeping and waking, his subconscious grip on his quirks was at its weakest. If he opened his eyes too quickly, he might accidentally activate laser vision and cut his ceiling in half. If he rolled over too fast, density shift might activate, and he would fall straight through his bed, through the floor, and into the apartment below them. So, he lay perfectly still, practicing his breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. He closed his eyes and visualized his mind. All Might had described his own power as an egg in a microwave, or a surging river. Izuku visualized his power as an infinite, towering library, millions of glowing, humming books, each containing the genetic sequence of a different quirk. Left alone, the books would fly off the shelves, swirling into a chaotic hurricane of overlapping phenomena. Izuku had to be the librarian. He had to meticulously, painstakingly catch every single book, close it, and lock it behind a massive, titanium vault door in his mind. Lock down the elemental emitters, he thought, feeling the heat fade from his fingertips. Lock down the sensory enhancers, he commanded, as the deafening sound of a car engine 3 miles away faded back into a dull hum. Lock down the kinetic accumulators. Lock down the spatial manipulators. Building the mental firewall took exactly 20 minutes of intense, agonizing concentration. By the time he was finished, his forehead was slick with sweat, and he was panting softly. Only then did he sit up. He reached over to his nightstand. Sitting on the wood was a pair of heavy, matte black metallic bracelets. They were sleek, unassuming, but dense. When the Hero Public Safety Commission had quietly caught wind of the Midoriya anomaly years ago, thanks to a terrified report from Dr. Tsubasa, they had panicked. A child who possessed every quirk was a walking doomsday device. There were talks of isolating him, locking him in Tartarus before he could even commit a crime. But Inko Midoriya, fueled by the ferocious love of a mother, had threatened to take her son and vanish. The commission knew that pushing a potential god into hiding, or worse, villainy, was a risk they couldn't take. So, a compromise was made. Complete secrecy, constant monitoring, and specialized support gear. The bracelets were designed by David Shield, the greatest scientist on the planet. They were lined with microscopic sensors that monitored Izuku's heart rate, adrenaline levels, and neural spikes. They projected a localized, dampening electromagnetic field into his bloodstream, creating friction against his quirk factors. They didn't erase his power, nothing could do that, but they acted as a governor on an engine, making it exponentially harder for quirks to activate accidentally. Izuku snapped the heavy metal bands onto his wrists. A small LED light on the top blinked green, indicating they were locked and active. The low hum of the dampeners sent a dull ache up his forearms, a constant reminder of the chains he had to wear just to exist in polite society. He walked into the kitchen. Inko was at the stove, humming softly as she flipped a Tamagotchi. She looked older than she should. The gray streaks in her green hair were testaments to the sheer stress of raising him. "Good morning, Izuku," she smiled warmly, though her eyes immediately flicked to the bracelets to ensure the light was green. "Morning, Mom," Izuku said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. He sat at the table, taking care not to grip the wooden chair too tightly. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, setting a plate in front of him. "I did." The firewall held up all night. No sleepwalking incidents, he smiled reassuringly. Last month, he had sleepwalked while accidentally using a phasing quirk and woke up trapped halfway inside the refrigerator. Inko let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Good. Good. Eat up, honey. You don't want to be late for school. It's career counseling day, isn't it?" Izuku paused, his chopsticks hovering over his eggs. "Yeah. It is. Have you thought about what you're going to write down?" Inko asked carefully, her voice tinged with a delicate hesitation. Izuku looked down at his food. He knew what she wanted him to write. She wanted him to write accountant. Or data analyst. Something quiet, safe, in a reinforced building where he wouldn't be triggered by danger. But Izuku couldn't do it. Ever since he was old enough to understand the terrifying expanse of his own biology, he had watched heroes on television. He watched All Might pull people from burning buildings, smiling, assuring them that everything would be alright. Izuku didn't just admire All Might, he envied him. All Might had immense power, but he used it to make people feel safe. Izuku's power only made people terrified. He wanted, more than anything in the world, to prove that he wasn't a monster. He wanted to learn how to open the vault in his mind, pull out a single book, and use it to save a life without destroying a city in the process. He wanted to be a hero. Not for glory, for redemption for a crime he hadn't even committed yet. "I'm applying to Yue High School," Izuku said softly. Inko froze. The spatula in her hand trembled. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly. "Okay, Izuku," she whispered. "Just please. Promise me you won't take off the bracelets. Promise me you'll keep the vault locked. I promise, Mom. I'll be careful, careful. It was the mantra of his entire existence. Aldera Junior High was an ordinary school filled with ordinary teenagers. The hallways were loud, filled with laughter, gossip, and the occasional minor quirk display, a boy stretching his neck to look into a classroom, a girl producing small puffs of perfume from her wrists. Izuku navigated the halls like a ghost. He kept his head down, clutching his notebook tightly to his chest. His notebook did not read hero analysis for the future. The cover, heavily worn at the edges, read Quirk Control, Suppression, Synergy Volume 13. Inside were not sketches of pro-heroes and fandom musings. It was a dense, hyper-analytical, almost manic catalog of his own internal biology. Izuku spent his free time watching heroes and villains not to admire them, but to study them. If he saw Kamui Woods use his arbor quirk, Izuku would spend hours meditating, searching his internal vault for his own wood generation quirks, analyzing the specific physiological feedback, and writing down exactly how to suppress or control it. It was a survival manual. He slid into his desk at the back of the classroom just before the bell rang. The atmosphere in Class 3A was unique. In most schools, there was a hierarchy. The strong quirk users at the top, the weak at the bottom. Katsuki Bakugo, with his devastating explosions and sharp intellect, should have been the undisputed king of Aldera, and he was, to an extent. Bakugo was loud, abrasive, and demanded excellence. But he was fundamentally altered. When Bakugo entered the room, his red eyes swept the desks. The moment his gaze landed on Izuku in the back corner, Bakugo's posture stiffened. He didn't sneer. He didn't yell. He gave Izuku a wide berth, silently walking to his own desk at the front of the room. The other students noticed. They had always noticed. They didn't know the full truth of Izuku Midoriya. The school record simply listed his quirk as energy manipulation, a vague, bureaucratic lie concocted by the Hero Commission. But kids are observant. They remembered the time in first grade when a stray dodgeball hit Izuku in the face, and the resulting kinetic recoil shattered every window in the gymnasium and threw the gym teacher into the bleachers. They remembered how quiet he was, how the air around him sometimes smelled like ozone, and how, occasionally, if he stared too hard, the gravity around his desk seemed to warp. They called him the glass god behind his back. Powerful, fragile, and utterly terrifying. No one bullied him. No one befriended him. They treated him like an unexploded bomb sitting in the middle of a crowded room. The homeroom teacher, a balding man with a perpetually nervous disposition, walked up to the podium holding a stack of papers. "All right, settle down," the teacher sighed. "Since you're all third years, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'm going to pass out these printouts for your desired career paths." He paused, looking out over the class. He grabbed the stack of papers and suddenly tossed them into the air. "But you all want to be heroes, right?" The classroom erupted into cheers. Students activated their quirks in a chaotic display of light, sound, and minor mutations. Bakugo leaned back in his chair, feet on his desk, letting out a sharp scoff. "Hey, Teach," Bakugo called out, his rough voice cutting through the noise. "Don't lump me in with these rejects. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal." The class immediately protested, shouting insults at Bakugo, who simply grinned, his palms crackling with small, controlled explosions. "Bring it on, extras! I've aced all the mock tests. I'm the only one here with the stuff for UA High School. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the top hero." "Oh right, Bakugo," the teacher said, adjusting his glasses and looking at his clipboard. "You are applying to UA High." The teacher swallowed hard, his eyes nervously darting to the back of the room. "And Midoriya, you're applying for UA as well, correct?" The chaotic noise of the classroom died instantly. It didn't taper off, it ceased, as if a vacuum had sucked the sound out of the room. 50 pairs of eyes slowly turned toward the back corner. Izuku sat perfectly still. His hands were folded neatly on his desk. The green LED lights on his metallic bracelets pulsed softly in the dead silence. He could hear their heartbeats. He could feel the sudden spike of adrenaline and fear in the room. His empathy quirk, one he struggled immensely to keep locked down, flooded his mind with their collective anxiety. Monster. Freak. He's going to kill us. Why is he even allowed outside? Izuku squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, reinforcing the firewall in his mind. He opened them and looked at the teacher, his expression painfully neutral. Yes, sir, Izuku said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried clearly in the silent room. I'm applying to the hero course. No one laughed. No one called him delusional. At the front of the room, Bakugo slowly lowered his feet from his desk. He turned his head, locking his piercing red eyes onto Izuku. The confident, arrogant smirk was entirely gone from Bakugo's face. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered. Bakugo didn't scream, "You're quirkless," like he would have in another life. Instead, his voice was low, laced with a complex mixture of intense rivalry and deep-seated apprehension. You better not hold back, Midoriya, Bakugo said, the words heavy, almost a warning. If you go to UA, you better figure out how to use that freak show inside you without blowing up the country. Because if you pull your punches, I'll kill you. Izuku met Bakugo's gaze. He understood what Katsuki was really saying. Katsuki's pride required him to be the best. But he couldn't prove he was the best if the strongest person in the world refused to fight back. It was a twisted, toxic dynamic born from the ashes of a destroyed forest. I'll do my best, Bakugo, Izuku replied evenly. The tension in the room was suffocating. The teacher nervously cleared his throat and quickly moved on to the next topic, desperately trying to ignore the sleeping god in the back row. When the final bell rang, Izuku packed his bag meticulously. He didn't rush. He waited for the classroom to empty out, letting the other students filter into the hallways before he stood up. He didn't want to accidentally brush shoulders with anyone. Physical contact was a risk. A friction negation quirk or a static discharge quirk could activate upon touch, and he couldn't bear the thought of hurting someone. He walked out of the school gates alone, taking the long way home. He preferred the quiet residential streets, avoiding the bustling shopping districts where the sensory input of thousands of people overwhelmed his dampeners. The afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the pavement. Izuku walked with his hands stuffed into his uniform pockets, his thumbs idly tracing the cold metal of his bracelets. He was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. The sheer psychological weight of maintaining the firewall for 8 hours straight left him feeling hollowed out. As he walked, he engaged in his usual mental exercises to keep his focus sharp. He looked at a stray cat walking along a brick wall. If I needed to catch that cat, Izuku thought, slipping into his analytical mindset, I couldn't use telekinesis. My telekinesis is tied to my emotional state, and it's too raw. I might crush its ribs. I would need to use vector manipulation to gently alter its trajectory, combined with tactile anesthesia to ensure it doesn't panic when caught. But vector manipulation shares a neural pathway with spatial warping, so I would have to engage the secondary firewall to ensure I don't accidentally teleport the cat into a wall. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was exhausting. To do the simplest thing, he had to calculate 1,000 variables. It was like trying to perform delicate brain surgery while driving a bulldozer. He stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. He looked down at his hands. They were scarred not from battle, but from his own body turning against itself over the years. Burn marks from accidental fire bursts, jagged silver lines from his skin turning to diamond and shattering, frostbite scars on his fingertips. Can someone like me be a hero? He whispered to the empty street. The world didn't need another god. It had plenty of power. Endeavor had power. Heroes with flashy, destructive quirks patrolled the streets every day. But Izuku didn't want to destroy villains. He wanted to save people. He wanted to be the safety net, the shield, the reassuring smile in the dark. But how could he smile when he was terrified every waking second? The pedestrian light turned green, emitting a soft, chirping sound. Izuku stepped off the curb, preparing to cross under the shadow of a large overpass. He was so deeply entrenched in his own internal monologue, so focused on suppressing the sensory quirks that warned him of danger, that he didn't notice the strange, squelching sound echoing from a nearby manhole cover. He didn't notice the dark, viscous liquid bubbling up from the grate, coalescing into a massive, towering form of sentient sludge. Izuku Midoriya possessed the genetic blueprint of every quirk in history. He held the power to level mountains, boil oceans, and tear the very fabric of reality at the seams. He was the most dangerous biological entity on the planet. But as the sludge villain reared up behind him, casting a massive, suffocating shadow over the boy, Izuku was just a frightened, 14-year-old kid who desperately didn't want to hurt anyone. A medium-sized meat suit, a wet, gurgling voice hissed from the shadows. Perfect. This will help me hide from him. Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, not from a quirk, but from pure, human instinct. The firewall in his mind flickered. The vault door rattled. The boy who held the world was about to be pushed to the edge. And the world was about to find out exactly what happens when the glass god drops his restraint. The shadow that fell over Izuku Midoriya was not cast by the late afternoon sun. It was thick, reeking of raw sewage and rotting garbage, a suffocating darkness that blotted out the light of the underpass. Izuku didn't even have time to turn his head. A mass of dark, viscous sludge slammed into his back with the force of a freight train. The sheer kinetic impact knocked the breath from his lungs, sending him stumbling forward onto the cold concrete. Before he could cry out, the liquid mass surged upward, wrapping around his legs, his torso, and finally, his face. A medium-sized meat suit! A voice gurgled, the sound wet and distorted, echoing from the amorphous blob enveloping him. Two bulbous, yellow eyes materialized in the sludge, glaring down at Izuku with feral desperation. Don't fight it, kid. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then it'll all be over. You're a hero to me, really. You're going to help me escape that maniac. Thick, putrid slime forced its way into Izuku's mouth and up his nostrils. The taste was vile, metallic, rancid, like stagnant canal water mixed with rusted copper. He gagged, his hands instinctively flying up to claw at the sludge, but his fingers simply phased through the liquid, finding no purchase. He couldn't breathe. His lungs spasmed, crying out for oxygen. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Izuku's mind. But it wasn't the panic of dying. It was a far more terrifying, instinctual dread. The firewall. Inside the infinite, towering library of Izuku's mind, the alarms began to shriek. Human biology is fundamentally designed for survival. When a body is suffocating, the autonomic nervous system takes over, overriding conscious thought with a desperate, primal mandate: survive at any cost. For a normal human, this meant thrashing, adrenaline spikes, and frantic clawing. For Izuku Midoriya, his body's survival mechanism meant opening the vault. Warning, his own mind screamed at him, the mental architecture trembling as the titanium vault door shuddered. Lethal threat detected. Initiating countermeasures. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. No! Keep it closed. He could feel the books flying off the shelves in the depths of his consciousness. His body wanted to save him. It wanted to activate pyrokinesis and boil the villain alive, reducing the sludge and the entire overpass to ash. It wanted to activate spatial rend and tear a hole in the fabric of the universe to displace the slime. It wanted to use repulsion field, a quirk that would violently repel all matter within a 3-mile radius, undoubtedly turning the surrounding city blocks into a crater. His pulse skyrocketed. The heavy, matte black bracelets on his wrists began to beep frantically, the LED lights shifting from a steady green to an urgent, flashing yellow, then a blaring red. The dampeners hummed violently, sending painful, electric shocks up his forearms as they struggled to suppress the titanic surge of quirk factors demanding release. Stop squirming! The sludge villain snarled, tightening his grip, forcing more foul liquid down Izuku's throat. Just die quietly, think, Izuku ordered himself, his vision beginning to edge with black. Think. Calculate. Do not react. Respond. If he let his body act on instinct, he would kill the villain and destroy the street. He had to be the surgeon. He had to pick up the scalpel, not the sledgehammer. Step 1. Immobilization. Izuku mentally reached into the chaotic storm of his own DNA. He bypassed the flashy, destructive quirks, pushing past gravity manipulation and kinetic shockwaves. He found a very specific, minor permutation of telekinesis. Not the kind that threw cars or shattered buildings, but a microcellular telekinesis, designed for localized, microscopic restraint. He engaged it. the air around him didn't explode. There was no flash of light, no booming shockwave. Instead, there was a profound, eerie stillness. The sludge villain suddenly froze. His yellow eyes widened in shock. What is this? I can't move! The villain's liquid body was instantly locked in place, every single molecule of sludge held in a perfect, invisible stasis. Izuku wasn't pushing the villain away. He was simply telling the villain's molecules that they were no longer allowed to move through space. Izuku slowly pulled the sludge out of his mouth and nose, gasping for air, falling to his hands and knees. He coughed violently, expelling the foul-tasting slime onto the concrete. His body trembled with the sheer, agonizing effort of holding the telekinetic lock while simultaneously fighting off the hundreds of other quirks screaming to be unleashed. Step 2. Neutralization. He couldn't hold the telekinesis forever without risking an aneurysm, and he needed a way to incapacitate the villain permanently without causing him lethal harm. Izuku looked at the paralyzed mass of slime. Liquid-based anatomy. High water concentration. He reached back into the vault. He carefully selected a quirk he had catalogued as atmospheric dehydration. It was a minor quirk, meant to draw moisture from the immediate air, usually used by rescue workers in humid climates to clear fog. Izuku grabbed the genetic sequence, synced it with his micro-telekinetic lock, and inverted the target from the air to the villain's physical form. He held up his right hand, pointing his palm at the frozen mass of sludge. "I'm sorry," Izuku whispered hoarsely, his throat raw. "This is going to be uncomfortable." He activated the quirk. The effect was instantaneous. The sludge villain let out a garbled, terrified shriek as the moisture within his amorphous body was violently pulled outward. Tiny droplets of water rapidly evaporated from the slime, drawn into the air like reverse rain. The villain's dark green sludge began to pale, turning a sickly dry brown. "No! Stop! What are you doing to me?" the villain cried, his form shrinking rapidly. Within 10 seconds the towering mass of liquid had been reduced to a pile of dry, brittle, cracked flakes, resembling dried mud on a riverbed. The two yellow eyes blinked rapidly, trapped in a solid, dehydrated chunk of dirt. The villain was entirely incapacitated, unable to move, unable to flow, perfectly preserved and entirely unharmed. Izuku immediately shut the quirks down. The backlash hit him like a physical blow. A blinding migraine pierced through his skull, and his nose began to bleed. His heavy bracelets, sensing the sudden drop in neural spikes, slowly cycled back from flashing red to a steady, calm green. The painful shocks in his forearms ceased, leaving his muscles twitching and sore. He slumped against the wall of the underpass, panting heavily, wiping the blood from his upper lip with the back of his trembling hand. He had done it. He had used his power, neutralized the threat, and hadn't destroyed a single thing. A small, desperate, fragile smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then, the manhole cover 10 feet away exploded upward. A geyser of water erupted from the sewers, followed immediately by a colossal figure shooting into the air. The man landed on the concrete with a heavy, earth-shaking thud, the sheer force of his arrival kicking up a gale of wind that fluttered Izuku's school uniform. "Fear not, citizen!" A voice boomed, so loud and resonant it seemed to vibrate in Izuku's very teeth. "For I am." The massive figure froze. All Might, the symbol of peace, the #1 hero, stood in the dim light of the underpass, his muscular arms raised in a dramatic, combat-ready pose. His iconic smile was plastered across his shadowed face, his bright blue eyes scanning the area for the villain he had been chasing through the city's labyrinthine sewer system. Instead, he found a pale, trembling teenager sitting on the ground, wiping a bloody nose, and a pile of remarkably dry, crumbling dirt with 2 blinking eyes embedded in it. All Might slowly lowered his arms. His booming smile faltered into a look of genuine bewilderment. He looked at the dirt. He looked at the boy. "Huh," All Might said, his booming voice dropping an octave into something approaching normal human confusion. "Well, it appears I am late." Tashinori Yagi, known to the world as All Might, was a man running out of time. For 5 years, he had carried a secret wound, a horrifying injury dealt to him by the ultimate evil, All for One. Half of his respiratory organs had been destroyed. His stomach was a mess of scar tissue. The flame of One for All, the sacred torch passed down through generations, was flickering, slowly burning out within his chest. He was in the city today not just to do hero work, but to meet with an old friend, Sir Night Eye, regarding a potential successor. A third-year student at Yue named Mirio Togata had been highly recommended. Tashinori was prepared to evaluate him, to see if this boy had the heart required to shoulder the weight of the world. He certainly hadn't expected to stumble upon this. All Might stepped closer, his massive boots echoing in the underpass. He looked down at the pile of dried sludge. He recognized the villain. It was the slippery rogue who had evaded him by diving into the sewers. "Young man," All Might said, his voice regaining its usual hearty resonance, though tempered with a gentle warmth. "Did you do this?" Izuku flinched. The sheer presence of All Might was overwhelming. It wasn't just the man's physical size. Izuku's sensory quirks, despite the dampeners, were going absolutely haywire. He could feel All Might. He could feel the aura radiating from the man, a blinding, golden, sun-like energy that felt completely different from any normal quirk. It felt ancient. It felt heavy, and terrifyingly Izuku could feel that the sun was dying, pulsing with erratic, weakening beats. I. Izuku stammered, scrambling backward slightly, his back hitting the concrete wall. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to use it, but he grabbed me, and I couldn't breathe, and my heart rate spiked, and the dampeners couldn't suppress the survival reflex. So I had to isolate a micro-telekinetic field and splice it with atmospheric dehydration. I swear I didn't hurt him. I just removed 60% of his water volume. He'll be fine if you just add a few liters of water." Izuku slapped his hands over his mouth, cutting off his own manic, terrified rambling. His heart was pounding so hard his vision blurred. He had just used the quirk in public. Without a license, in front of the #1 hero. The Hero Commission was going to lock him up. They were going to take him away from his mother. All Might stared at the boy. His brilliant blue eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the details. He noted the heavy, metallic bracelets on the boy's wrists. He noted the sheer terror in the boy's massive green eyes. He noted the blood on the boy's lip. Micro-telekinetic field? Atmospheric dehydration? Splice? All Might thought, his mind racing. A normal person has one quirk. Maybe a hybrid of two if they were a rare genetic mix. This boy had just rattled off two completely unrelated quirks as if he had picked them off a menu, and he spoke of dampeners and survival reflexes. Then, a memory surfaced in Tashinori's mind. A highly classified briefing he had attended years ago at the Hero Public Safety Commission. A hushed, terrified conversation among the elites about a child born in Muzurifu. A genetic anomaly. A boy who didn't just have a quirk, but possessed the blueprint for all of them. The Midoriya anomaly. Tashinori had dismissed it as a myth, an exaggeration born of panic. But looking at the trembling teenager in front of him, he realized the myth was real. And the myth was absolutely terrified. All Might's demeanor softened instantly. He didn't see a god of destruction. He saw a child who was afraid of his own shadow. "Breathe, young man," All Might said gently, crouching down so his massive frame was less imposing. "You are not in trouble. In fact, you acted with incredible precision. You neutralized the lethal threat without causing collateral damage, and without harming the villain. That is the hallmark of a true pro." Izuku blinked. The tears that had been welling in his eyes suddenly froze. I'm not in trouble? A hero does not punish a civilian for defending their own life." All Might smiled, a genuine, warm expression that wasn't for the cameras. He reached into his massive pocket and pulled out 2 large, empty soda bottles he had bought earlier. "Now let's get this scoundrel packaged up safely before he rehydrates." Izuku watched, paralyzed with disbelief, as All Might quickly scooped the dried flakes of the sludge villain into the empty soda bottles, screwing the caps on tightly. The #1 hero patted his pockets, standing back up to his full, towering height. "There we go! Safe and sound," All Might boomed, turning back to Izuku. "You have my thanks, young." All Might paused. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, a warning sign he knew all too well. His time limit was up. 3 hours a day. That was all he had left, and he had burned through the last of it chasing the sludge villain through the sewers. He needed to leave. Now, well, I must be off, All Might announced, turning his back and bending his knees, preparing to jump. Take care to get home safely, young man. A hero's work is never done. Wait! Izuku cried out. The desperation in the boy's voice stopped All Might in his tracks. It wasn't the voice of a fan wanting an autograph. It was a plea. A desperate, agonizing plea from a soul standing on the edge of a cliff. Izuku pushed himself off the ground, his legs shaking. He didn't know why he was doing this. He had spent his entire life hiding, keeping his head down, maintaining the firewall, but standing before him was the symbol of peace. The one man in the world who understood what it meant to hold unfathomable power, and the terrifying responsibility that came with it. Wait, please, Izuku choked out, the dam finally breaking. Tears spilled down his freckled cheeks. I need to ask you something. All Might looked back over his shoulder. The steam was beginning to rise from his body, the precursor to his transformation. He shouldn't stay. He couldn't let anyone see his true form, but the look in the boy's eyes rooted him to the spot. Can? Izuku started, his voice cracking. He took a shuddering breath, clutching his chest. Can someone like me be a hero? Can someone who is a walking disaster, someone who could destroy the world by accident, can I be a hero without hurting anyone? The underpass fell dead silent, save for the distant rumble of traffic overhead. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating the rejection. He expected All Might to tell him the truth. That he was too dangerous. That he should listen to the commission, listen to his mother, keep his head down, and vanish into obscurity. That power without absolute control was just villainy waiting to happen. Instead, a thick hiss of steam filled the air. Poof! Izuku opened his eyes. He blinked, confusion cutting through his tears. The towering, muscular god of justice was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken cheeks, baggy clothes that hung off his fragile frame, and a mess of untidy blonde hair framing a face lined with exhaustion. The man coughed into his hand, a small splatter of blood staining his palm. Ah, blast it, the skeletal man sighed, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and wiping his mouth. He looked at Izuku, offering a tired, melancholic smile. Well, this is a bit awkward. Izuku stared, his mouth hanging open. His sensory quirks, previously overwhelmed by the blazing sun of All Might's aura, now processed the truth. The golden energy was still there, but it was incredibly faint, housed within a body that was quite literally falling apart. You're... Izuku whispered, his brain struggling to reconcile the image. You're All Might? The one and only, Toshinori replied, sitting down heavily on the pavement, groaning as his bad knee popped. Though I suppose I look a bit less impressive without the flex. A trick of the trade, you see, like a guy sucking in his gut at the pool. But how? You're the symbol of peace. You're invincible, Izuku said, taking a step forward. Toshinori let out a hollow laugh. He slowly pulled up the side of his baggy white t-shirt. Izuku gasped. The entire left side of Toshinori's torso was a twisted, horrific mass of jagged purple scar tissue. It looked like a crater, spiraling inward, radiating a phantom pain that Izuku's empathetic quirk could physically feel as a dull throb in his own side. 5 years ago, Toshinori said softly, dropping the shirt. An enemy hit me. Destroyed half my respiratory organs and took my stomach entirely. The surgeries wore me out. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I'm just this. Izuku was speechless. The invincible god was a broken man. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes and to trick the fear inside of me, Toshinori continued, his deep blue eyes locking onto Izuku's trembling form. I am the symbol of peace because the world needs to believe that the symbol is untouchable. But the truth is, I am terrified. Every single day. Terrified that I won't be fast enough. Terrified that my strength will fail when someone needs me most. Toshinori patted the space on the concrete next to him. Sit down, young Midoriya. Izuku's eyes widened. You know my name? I know what the Hero Commission calls you, Toshinori corrected, his tone gentle. The Midoriya anomaly. The boy with a million quirks. They told me about you years ago. They were afraid of you. They thought you were a ticking time bomb. Izuku's shoulders slumped. He walked over, his legs heavy, and sat down on the cold concrete beside the gaunt hero. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around his legs, staring blankly at the street. They're right, Izuku whispered. I am a bomb. My whole life. I have to lock everything away. If I lose focus, if I get angry, if I get surprised, I could level a city block. I sneezed when I was 5 and destroyed a forest. I have to wear these bracelets to numb my own brain so I don't accidentally pull the air out of the atmosphere or turn the street into glass. Tears began to fall again, hot and fast, tracing paths down his freckles. I just want to help people. I watch you on TV, and you save everyone with a smile. You make them feel safe. But all I do is make people afraid. Even my mom, she loves me, but I know she's scared. Bakugo is terrified of me. My teachers look at me like I'm a monster. How can I be a hero if my very existence makes people feel unsafe? Toshinori listened in silence. He didn't interrupt. He let the boy pour out years of accumulated grief, isolation, and agonizing self-restraint. As Toshinori looked at Izuku, his perspective shifted entirely. He had come to this city looking for a successor. He had been looking for someone strong, someone brave, someone who could wield the immense, crushing power of One for All. But looking at Izuku Midoriya, Toshinori realized something profound. Power was the easiest part of being a hero. Power could be trained. Power could be inherited. Restraint, empathy, and the terrifying burden of putting others before oneself. That was the true essence of a hero. This boy had the power to rule the world. He could have grown bitter, arrogant, and cruel. He could have lashed out at a society that looked at him like a freak. He could have become a villain that would make All for One look like a common street thug. Instead, Izuku Midoriya had spent his entire life meticulously agonizing over how to be gentle. He walked on eggshells to protect a world that feared him. When attacked by a monster, his first thought wasn't vengeance. It was a surgical, precise application of the absolute minimum force required to stop the threat without hurting the villain. He doesn't need One for All, Toshinori realized, a profound sense of awe washing over him. He already has all the power in the world. What he needs is a guide. A father. An anchor. Young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. Izuku sniffled, looking up at the skeletal man. Power is nothing but a tool, Toshinori said, holding up a thin, scarred hand. A hammer can build a house, or it can crush a skull. The hammer doesn't decide. The heart of the man wielding it decides. The fact that you are terrified of your own strength, the fact that you actively choose to hold back to protect others, that tells me everything I need to know about your heart. Toshinori leaned forward, his blue eyes piercing through Izuku's insecurities. You asked me if you can be a hero without destroying the world, Toshinori said. I am telling you, right now, that you are the only one who can. Izuku stopped breathing. The words hung in the air, wrapping around his fractured soul like a warm blanket. You see yourself as a bomb, Toshinori continued softly. I see a boy who loves this world so much that he carries the weight of it on his shoulders every single second of his life. That is heroism in its purest form, Izuku. You are not a monster. You are a protector. A sob tore out of Izuku's throat. It was an ugly, guttural sound, the sound of a 14-year-old boy finally letting go of a decade of suffocating tension. He buried his face in his knees and wept, his narrow shoulders shaking violently. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't looking at him with fear. Someone wasn't looking at the quirk. They were looking at him. Toshinori reached out and gently rested his large, bony hand on the boy's head, letting him cry. They sat there in the dim light of the underpass for a long time, a dying sun and a terrified god, finding solace in each other's presence. When Izuku finally ran out of tears, he wiped his face with the sleeve of his uniform, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He felt lighter. The immense, crushing pressure in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt manageable. It felt shared. Thank you, Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse. Thank you so much. You have nothing to thank me for, my boy, Toshinori smiled softly. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his joints popped again. He looked down at the teenager. You mentioned earlier that you're applying to UA High School, correct? Izuku nodded, scrambling to his feet. Yes, sir. The hero course. Though I don't know how I'm going to pass the practical exam. They usually involve combat or destruction, and I don't know how to use my stronger quirks without causing a disaster. Toshinori hummed thoughtfully, rubbing his sharp chin. A valid concern. Your body and your mind are entirely out of sync. You have the raw materials to build a skyscraper, but you're trying to do it without a blueprint, terrified that the steel beams will crush someone. He looked Izuku directly in the eye, his expression shifting from a gentle mentor to a seasoned warrior. The UA entrance exam is in 10 months, Toshinori stated. If you try to take that exam as you are now, you will either fail because you hold back too much, or you will accidentally level the testing grounds. You lack physical conditioning, mental discipline, and the martial foundation required to ground your power. Izuku nodded slowly. I know. But I don't know how to train. The commission won't let me practice my quirks, and I don't have anyone to teach me. Toshinori straightened his posture. Even in his skeletal form, he commanded the space around him with an undeniable authority. You do now. Izuku blinked, his jaw dropping. Wait, what? I cannot give you power, Izuku, Toshinori said, a fierce, determined fire igniting in his sunken blue eyes. You already have more power than anyone who has ever walked this earth. What I can give you is discipline. I can teach you the martial arts I learned in my youth. I can teach you how to build a body strong enough to withstand the recoil of your own quirks. I can teach you the philosophy of peace, the tactics of restraint, and the absolute necessity of a smile. Toshinori extended a hand toward the stunned teenager. I cannot take away your burden, Toshinori said, his voice echoing with solemn sincerity. But I will stand beside you, and I will teach you how to carry it. Will you let me be your mentor, Izuku Midoriya? Izuku stared at the extended hand. He thought about the silent, lonely years in his padded bedroom. He thought about Bakugo's terrified eyes. He thought about his mother's forced smiles, hiding her constant anxiety. He had walked in the dark for so long, desperate for a sliver of light to guide him out of the labyrinth of his own mind. And now, the greatest hero in the world was offering him a map. Izuku didn't hesitate. He reached out and grabbed Toshinori's hand, gripping it with a strength that belied his fragile appearance. He looked up, his massive green eyes burning with a newfound, unshakable resolve. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of his mind, but it was no longer driving the vehicle. Yes, Izuku said firmly, his voice steady. Yes, All Might. Please teach me. Toshinori's smile widened, genuine and bright. Excellent. But first things first. We have a lot of work to do, and not much time. Tomorrow morning, at 6 a.m., meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. The beach? Izuku tilted his head, confused. But isn't that place a massive illegal dumping ground? It's covered in trash. Exactly. Toshinori beamed, clapping Izuku on the shoulder. If you want to learn how to move mountains without breaking them, you must first learn how to move trash without using your quirks. We are going to build your foundation from the ground up, young Midoriya. By the time 10 months have passed, you will be a vessel worthy of the power you hold. Izuku felt a spark of genuine excitement flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years without a corresponding spike of panic. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his future with dread, he was looking at it with hope. The sun had nearly set by the time Izuku finally unlocked the door to his apartment. The sky outside was painted in deep hues of purple and bruised orange. I'm home, Izuku called out, toeing off his red sneakers in the Genkan. Inko hurried out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes immediately darted to his wrists, checking the LED lights on his bracelets. They were glowing a steady, calm green. She let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief, though her brow furrowed when she noticed his disheveled uniform. Izuku! You're late, she fretted, rushing forward to brush some imaginary dust off his shoulder. I was getting worried. Did something happen? Your clothes smell a bit strange. Izuku looked at his mother. He saw the permanent worry lines etched into her face, the graying hair, the way she was always anticipating a disaster that was entirely out of her control. He had caused her so much pain simply by existing. But tonight, he didn't feel like a curse. Nothing bad happened, Mom, Izuku said softly, offering her a genuine, relaxed smile. It wasn't his usual, forced expression. It was calm. Inko blinked, taken aback. She hadn't seen him look this peaceful since he was a toddler, before the doctor's appointment that changed their lives forever. Are you sure? You look different. I met someone today, Izuku said, walking past her into the living room, feeling lighter than air. He's going to help me train for the UA entrance exam. He's going to teach me how to control it. Inko froze. Train? Izuku, you know the commission's rules. You can't use your quirks. It's too dangerous. Who could possibly teach you? Izuku turned around, his eyes shining with a quiet, undeniable confidence. It's okay, Mom, he said, and for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. I'm going to be okay, he promised. Later that night, long after Inko had gone to sleep, Izuku sat at his desk. The single desk lamp cast a warm glow over his open notebook. He didn't write about quirk suppression algorithms. He didn't write about the physiological feedback loops of elemental manipulation. He picked up his pen and turned to a fresh, blank page. At the top of the page, he wrote a single heading, the path to the symbol. Underneath, he wrote down the schedule Toshinori had given him. He wrote down the dietary requirements. He wrote down the mental exercises Toshinori had suggested for maintaining focus without relying entirely on the dampeners. Izuku looked down at the heavy, matte black bracelets on his wrists. For years he had viewed them as chains. They were the physical manifestation of his own monstrosity, the locks on a cage that he was trapped inside. But as he traced the cold metal with his fingertips, his perspective shifted. They weren't chains. They were training weights. And one day, when his mind and body were finally strong enough, he would take them off. Not to destroy the world, but to protect it. He closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and climbed into bed. As he closed his eyes, preparing to build his mental firewall for the night, the infinite, towering library of his mind didn't seem quite so terrifying. The chaotic storm of books humming with terrifying power still raged in the darkness, waiting to be unleashed. But as the librarian walked through the aisles, checking the locks on the vault doors, he was no longer trembling. He had a purpose now. He had an anchor. And tomorrow morning, at the edge of a trash-filled beach, the boy who held the world would take his first true step toward becoming its greatest hero. The sea breeze that swept across the Goba Municipal Beach tasted of salt and the crisp, stinging promise of a late February morning. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a brilliant array of pink and gold across the gentle waves of the ocean. For the first time in over a decade, those waves actually met the sand. Izuku Midoriya stood at the edge of the water, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his chin and sinking into the damp earth. He was stripped down to a plain white tank top and dark shorts. His muscles, once non-existent, now corded tightly along his arms, shoulders, and legs. They were compact, dense, and forged in the agonizing crucible of pure, unadulterated physical labor. Behind him, sitting atop the sea wall, Toshinori Yagi looked down at the pristine beach. 10 months ago, this stretch of coastline had been an illegal dumping ground, buried under literal tons of rusted refrigerators, crushed cars, and rotting tires. You didn't use a single quirk, Toshinori said, his skeletal face breaking into a wide, immensely proud smile. Not once in 10 months. Izuku turned around, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He looked at the heavy, matte black bracelets resting on his wrists. They were a newer model, quietly delivered by David Shield 2 weeks ago to accommodate his increased muscle mass. The LED lights on them pulsed a steady, rhythmic green. If I used a quirk, it would have defeated the purpose, Izuku said, his voice deeper and steadier than it had been a year ago. I needed to know my baseline. I needed to know what my own 2 hands could carry before I started picking up the tools. Toshinori hopped down from the seawall, his oversized trench coat billowing around his gaunt frame. He approached the boy, placing a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. You have built a magnificent vessel, young Midoriya, Toshinori said softly. Your body can now handle the recoil of the lower and mid-tier quirks without fracturing. Your mind is sharper. You have learned the martial foundations. You are no longer a glass bottle trying to hold a thunderstorm. You are a lightning rod. Izuku looked down at his scarred hands. He remembered the terrified, trembling 14-year-old boy who had cried in a dirty underpass. He still felt fear. The infinite, towering library in his mind still hummed with catastrophic potential, but the fear was no longer paralyzing. It was a cold, sharp focus. Today is the UA entrance exam, Toshinori said, his tone shifting to one of absolute seriousness. I will be in the observation room with the other teachers. I cannot help you, and I cannot show you favoritism. You must pass this on your own merits. But remember our philosophy, Izuku. What are you? Izuku looked up, his massive green eyes hardened with emerald resolve. I am a surgeon. Not a hammer. Toshinori smiled, a genuine, blinding expression. Then go show them how to wield a scalpel. The sheer scale of UA High School was intimidating enough to make a normal person's knees weak. The massive, H-shaped glass building towered over the surrounding city like a monument to modern heroism. Izuku stood at the front gates, wearing his black Aldera Junior High uniform, his new bracelets hidden beneath the sleeves of his jacket. The sheer volume of people flooding through the gates was triggering his sensory quirks. He could hear 1,000 heartbeats. He could smell the varied pheromones of anxiety, confidence, and sweat. He could feel the ambient electromagnetic fields of the various mutant and emitter quirks passing by him. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Lock down the auditory enhancers. Lock down the olfactory receptors. Maintain the firewall. When he opened his eyes, the overwhelming cacophony of the crowd dulled to a manageable hum. He took a step forward, determined to walk through the gates with his head held high. Stupid Deku. The voice was low, harsh, and practically vibrating with barely contained tension. Izuku paused and turned his head. Katsuki Bakugo was walking a few paces away. Bakugo didn't look at Izuku. His red eyes were fixed dead ahead, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His shoulders were incredibly tense, drawn up to his ears as if he were trying to make himself a smaller target. Izuku didn't say anything. The dynamic between them was a fragile pane of glass. Bakugo was no longer the arrogant bully who flaunted his explosions. He was a boy haunted by the memory of a vaporized forest. Bakugo's drive to become a hero was no longer just about glory. It was a desperate, agonizing quest to prove his own existence had meaning in a world where someone like Izuku walked around. Bakugo strode past him without another word, giving Izuku a wide, deliberate berth. Izuku let out a soft sigh and resumed his walk. As he did, a girl with short, bobbed brown hair walking slightly ahead of him tripped over a slightly uneven paving stone. She gasped, her arms flailing as she pitched forward toward the hard concrete. Izuku reacted instantly. He didn't use telekinesis. He didn't use a speed quirk. He simply used the leg muscles he had spent 10 months tearing and rebuilding on Dagoba Beach. He lunged forward, his foot pivoting flawlessly, and caught the girl by the shoulders just before her face met the pavement. Careful, Izuku said softly, easily pulling her back to her feet. The girl blinked, her cheeks dusting with a bright pink blush. She looked at him, wide-eyed. Oh. Thank you so much. I was so nervous my feet just tangled up. That would have been a really bad omen for the exam, huh? Izuku quickly let go of her shoulders, taking a polite half-step back. It's no problem. The pavement is a bit uneven there. Good luck on the exam. You too. She beamed, her nervous energy replaced with a sunny smile. I'm Achiko Uraraka. Let's both do our best. She waved and jogged off toward the main building. Izuku watched her go, a small, genuine smile gracing his features. He had interacted with another person, touched them, and hadn't accidentally launched them into the stratosphere. It was a minor victory, but to Izuku, it meant the world. The written portion of the exam was trivial. Izuku possessed several passive intelligence-enhancing and memory retention quirks. He didn't even need to actively use them. They simply operated in the background, allowing his brain to process and recall information at a terrifying speed. He finished the 2-hour exam in 25 minutes, spending the remaining hour and a half meticulously reviewing his mental firewall. When the written exam concluded, the applicants were ushered into a massive, stadium-sized auditorium for the practical exam briefing. Izuku sat in the middle rows, listening quietly as President Mike, the voice hero, enthusiastically explained the rules. The exam was a mock urban battle. Applicants would be dropped into simulated cityscapes and tasked with destroying 3 types of villain bots, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Robots, Izuku thought, pulling out his notebook. He quickly began to analyze the situation. If they are mechanical, they lack a biological aura. This means my biosensory quirks won't detect them. I'll have to rely on thermal imaging or electromagnetic field detection to track them. But more importantly, they are large, heavily armored machines. Izuku chewed on the end of his pen, his mind racing. If I use an offensive quirk like kinetic shockwave or pyrokinesis to destroy a robot, the resulting explosion or shrapnel could easily maim or kill the other applicants. I can't guarantee their safety if I'm throwing raw power around. Furthermore, if I punch one with enough force to shatter titanium, the sound barrier breaking in an enclosed city street will rupture the eardrums of everyone within a 50-meter radius. Excuse me. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and a severe haircut stood up near the front, pointing rigidly at President Mike. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, UA, the top hero agency in Japan, should be ashamed of such a foolish mistake. Furthermore, you, the boy with the unkempt hair, the tall boy whipped around, pointing directly at Izuku. You've been muttering and writing in your notebook this entire time. This is a serious exam, not a fan club meeting. If you are not taking this seriously, leave at once. The auditorium went dead silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to Izuku. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He simply closed his notebook with a soft snap. He looked at the tall boy, his emerald eyes calm, analytical, and completely devoid of intimidation. I apologize if my muttering distracted you, Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. I was simply calculating the blast radius of a 3-point robot's destruction to ensure I don't accidentally catch any of my fellow examinees in the shrapnel crossfire. But you are correct, I should keep my tactical assessments internalized. Thank you for the correction. The tall boy blinked, his rigid posture faltering for a moment, completely derailed by the polite, hyper-competent response. Yeah. I see. A proactive tactical approach. Carry on, then. He stiffly sat back down. President Mike cleared his throat, a bit unnerved by the intensity of the green-haired kid, before explaining that the 4th robot was a 0-pointer, a massive obstacle designed to be avoided. With the briefing concluded, the applicants were directed to change into their athletic gear and report to their assigned battle centers. Izuku changed into a custom-made, dark green tracksuit. The fabric was specially woven by David Shield's support company. It was highly elastic, heat-resistant, and lined with a subtle mesh that helped disperse kinetic feedback. He snapped his bracelets back onto his wrists, checking the lights one last time. He boarded the bus to Battle Center B. He stood near the back, observing the other applicants. He saw the girl from earlier, Uraraka, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. He saw the tall boy with glasses, Ida, stretching his calves, revealing mechanical exhaust pipes protruding from his legs. An engine quirk, Izuku catalogued mentally. High linear velocity, low lateral agility. Prone to stalling if the intakes are blocked. The bus came to a halt in front of massive, towering metal gates. Beyond them lay a sprawling, simulated metropolis. It was a complete city, skyscrapers, paved roads, traffic lights, and alleyways. Izuku stepped off the bus and walked to the front of the crowd, standing directly before the towering gates. He closed his eyes. It was time to choose his tools. He couldn't use a hammer. He needed the scalpel. He reached into the infinite library of his mind. He walked past the towering sections labeled catastrophic emitters and reality warping. He moved to the quiet, dusty shelves in the back of his mind. Tool 1 Frictionless. A mutant-type quirk that altered the molecular surface of his skin to completely negate physical friction. He routed this quirk specifically to the soles of his shoes. Tool 2 Minor Kinetic Enhancement. A simple emitter quirk that slightly boosted the kinetic energy output of his leg muscles. Nothing flashy. Just enough to move fast. Tool 3 metal phasing. A highly specific transformation quirk. By vibrating his cellular structure at a specific frequency, he could temporarily bypass the atomic bonds of metallic alloys, allowing his flesh to pass through solid steel like water. He locked these 3 quirks into his active neural pathways. He felt the familiar, dull ache in his forearms as the dampeners on his wrists whined, working overtime to suppress the rest of the genetic vault from spilling open. Right, listen up. Present Mick's voice boomed from the massive speakers positioned around the gate. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The colossal metal gates began to slowly groan open. The other applicants hesitated, waiting for the gates to open wide enough to charge through. Izuku didn't wait. Before the gates were even 2 feet apart, he activated the kinetic enhancement and the frictionless saws. He didn't run. He glided. He pushed off the asphalt like a speed skater on flawless ice, sliding through the narrow gap in the gates with a burst of terrifying, silent speed. He was inside the city before the others even registered he had moved. Deep within the central tower of UA High, an array of massive, high-definition monitors covered an entire wall. Seated in front of the screens were the elite faculty of the academy, veteran pro heroes who had seen it all. Midnight, Snipe, Ectoplasm, Cementos, and Present Mike watched the screens intently, taking notes on their clipboards. Sitting in the center, drinking a cup of tea with an air of sophisticated calm, was Nizu, the principal of UA. Standing in the back shadows, watching the screens with a heavy, sunken gaze, was Tashinori Yagi. And leaning against the wall near him was Shota Aizawa, the underground hero known as Eraserhead. We have a promising crop this year, Midnight purred, tapping her riding crop against her palm as she watched a monitor showing Battle Center A. Look at the boy with the explosion quirk. Vicious, precise, and completely ruthless. He's racking up villain points at a staggering pace. Indeed, Snipe drawled, adjusting his cowboy hat. The kid's got the combat instincts of a veteran. But he's a bit of a lone wolf. Ignoring the others completely, Aizawa wasn't looking at Bakugo. His tired, bloodshot eyes were fixed on the monitor displaying Battle Center B. What's the status on Center B? Aizawa asked, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. The point tallies for the robots are dropping rapidly, but there's no seismic feedback or explosive signatures on the audio feed. Nizu's ears twitched. He set down his teacup and tapped a few keys on his console, bringing up a centralized, top-down view of Battle Center B. Curious, Nizu hummed, his beady eyes glittering with intense intelligence. A massive number of villain bots are going offline, but they aren't being destroyed. They are simply powering down. Nizu zoomed in on a specific sector of the city where a cluster of 3-point robots had just ceased functioning. The camera angle shifted, catching a blur of dark green moving down the alleyway. Nizu slowed the footage down to a quarter speed. The room fell completely silent. On the screen, Izuku Midoriya was not fighting. He was dancing. He was gliding across the asphalt as if it were coated in oil, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. He approached a massive, heavily armored 3-point robot that had just locked its targeting lasers onto him. The robot raised a massive metal arm to crush him. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't brace for impact. He simply glided forward, sliding directly under the massive arm. As he passed beneath the robot's chassis, he reached up with his bare left hand. The teachers watched in absolute disbelief as Izuku's hand simply phased through the solid, 2-inch thick titanium armor plating of the robot's underbelly. He didn't break the metal. There was no hole. His hand just sank into the steel as if it were a pool of water. A fraction of a second later, Izuku pulled his hand out. Clutched in his grip was the central processing unit and the primary power cable, severed cleanly from the inside. He dropped the parts on the ground and glided past. Behind him, the 3-point robot's eyes flickered and died. The massive machine simply slumped forward, entirely intact, completely neutralized, and utterly silent. What did I just watch? Present Mike whispered, pulling his sunglasses down the bridge of his nose. He phased through solid titanium, Ectoplasm stated, his mechanical voice laced with shock. A transformation or mutant-type quirk. Density manipulation, perhaps? But look at his feet, Snipe pointed out, leaning closer to the screen. He's not running. He's sliding. That's a friction negation quirk. It's completely unrelated to density manipulation. Aizawa's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. He pulled out a thick file folder from his utility belt and flipped it open. Applicant number 7111. Izuku Midoriya. Registered quirk, energy manipulation. Aizawa looked up from the file, his gaze locking onto the screen. He is not manipulating energy. He is utilizing multiple, distinct physical phenomena that do not share a biological pathway. A human body can handle a hybrid quirk. It cannot handle two entirely separate, unrelated quirk factors operating simultaneously. Unless, Niza said softly, a terrifyingly sharp smile spreading across his snout, the registry is a lie constructed by the Hero Public Safety Commission to hide something they are afraid of. Toshinori swallowed hard in the back of the room, clutching his side. He knew exactly what Izuku was doing. The boy had found a way to fight without causing a single spark of collateral damage. He was disassembling the robots with surgical precision. On the screen, Izuku rounded a corner. He saw the tall boy with engines in his legs, Ida, cornered by two two-point robots. Ida was preparing to kick one, but he was blind to the second robot raising its mechanical tail to strike him from behind. Izuku didn't shout a warning. He dropped the metal phasing quirk from his active slots, instantly replacing it with minor vector redirection. Izuku snapped his fingers. On the screen, the second robot swung its massive metal tail at Ida's back. But right before it connected, the kinetic trajectory of the tail instantly inverted. The tail whipped backward, defying all laws of momentum, and smashed into the robot's own optical sensors, blinding it and sending it crashing into a brick wall. Ida finished kicking the first robot, entirely unaware that he had just been saved. Izuku was already gone, gliding down another street. He just altered kinetic vectors, Aizawa said, his voice dropping into a deadly, serious register. The tired hero leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the console. Friction negation, density phasing, vector manipulation. That's 3. Aizawa turned his head, looking directly into the dark corner of the room where Toshinori stood. All might. You've been spending time in Muzidafu recently. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a kid who breaks the fundamental laws of quirk genetics, would you? Toshinori coughed into his hand, maintaining his stoic facade. I am merely an observer today, Eraserhead. The applicant's abilities speak for themselves. Niza chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down the spines of the teachers. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. He has racked up 75 villain points without causing a single explosion, without destroying a single piece of city infrastructure, and without making a sound. He is a ghost. Niza raised a small paw and hovered it over a large red button on his console. But true heroism isn't just about surgical precision in ideal conditions, Niza said, his eyes glinting. Let us see how the surgeon reacts when the patient starts bleeding out. Niza slammed his paw onto the red button. Izuku glided to a halt in the center of a wide intersection. His breathing was steady, though his forearms were burning with agonizing pain. He had swapped quirks out of his active slots 14 times in the last 8 minutes. The dampeners on his wrists were whining audibly now, the LED lights flashing a rapid, warning yellow. The friction against his quirk factors was taking a toll on his nervous system. He needed to stop. He had easily secured enough points to pass the practical. Time to power down, Izuku thought. He closed his eyes, preparing to initiate the mental lockdown procedure, and pull his active quirks back behind the firewall. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet violently heaved. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was an earthquake. The asphalt buckled and cracked. Izuku's eyes snapped open just in time to see the towering skyscrapers at the end of the main avenue explode outward in a shower of glass and steel. From the dust and rubble rose a mechanical monstrosity. It was easily 100 feet tall, a colossal, tread-driven behemoth that eclipsed the sun. The zero-pointer. The sheer size of the machine was horrifying. It raised a massive arm and slammed it into a nearby building, shattering it like glass. Chunks of concrete the size of minivans rained down upon the simulated city. Panic instantly gripped the remaining examinees. Run! It's the zero-pointer! Someone screamed. Izuku watched as dozens of teenagers turned and sprinted away in sheer terror. Even Ida, the boy with the engine legs, was retreating, recognizing the futility of engaging such a massive target. Izuku took a step back. His logical brain told him to run. There were no points to be gained here, but as the dust momentarily cleared, Izuku's enhanced vision caught a glimpse of movement near the base of the machine. It was the girl from earlier. Uraraka. A massive slab of concrete from the destroyed building had fallen, pinning her leg to the ground. She was struggling frantically to push it off, but she was trapped, and the zero-pointer's massive, tank-like treads were rolling directly toward her. She was going to be crushed. Izuku's heart stopped. He didn't think about the exam. He didn't think about his points. He didn't even think about the dampeners. He looked at the 100-foot-tall machine of death, and he looked at the terrified girl trapped in its path. If I use a kinetic shockwave to punch the robot, Izuku's mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The sheer force required to stop that much mass will create a concussive blast that will pulverize the girl. If I use a thermal quirk to melt it, the radiant heat will incinerate her. I cannot destroy the machine. I have to remove the mass entirely. Izuku reached into his mind. He walked past the dusty shelves of the minor quirks. He walked straight to the center of the room, to the massive, titanium vault door covered in heavy locks and chains. He grabbed the handle. He didn't open the vault completely. He couldn't. But he cracked the door just a fraction of an inch, reaching his hand into the blinding, chaotic storm of godhood, and pulled out 2 specific books: Catastrophic Emitter, Gravity Reversal, Catastrophic Transformation, Matter Transmutation. The moment he pulled them into his active neural pathways, the heavy black bracelets on his wrists let out a high-pitched, screaming beep. The LED lights instantly flashed a violent, blinding red. A wave of agonizing pain, like boiling water in his veins, shot up his arms. Izuku screamed, the sound tearing from his throat as the raw power flooded his system. He kicked off the ground. He didn't use the minor kinetic enhancement. He used pure, unadulterated strength, shattering the asphalt beneath him into dust, launching himself like a ballistic missile directly toward the towering face of the zero-pointer. In the observation room, the teachers leaped to their feet. He's attacking it? Snipe yelled. His bio-readings just spiked off the charts. Ectoplasm shouted, pointing at the monitor. He's putting out enough energy to level the entire battle center. Stop the exam! Aizawa roared, his eyes flashing red as his hair defied gravity, desperately trying to lock onto Izuku through the cameras. But he couldn't get a clear line of sight on the boy moving at Mach speeds. He's going to kill everyone in that sector. Toshinori gripped the railing so hard the metal warped beneath his fingers. Control it, Izuku. Be the surgeon. Izuku rocketed through the air, crossing the distance in a fraction of a second. The zero-pointer's massive, glowing red optical sensor locked onto him, recognizing him as a target. The robot drew back its massive fist to swat him out of the air. Izuku extended both of his hands, ignoring the blood dripping from his nose and the agonizing burning in his forearms. He slammed his palms directly into the cold steel of the zero-pointer's face. He activated gravity reversal. Instantly, the terrifying, crushing weight of the 100-foot robot vanished. The machine was ripped from the earth, its massive treads tearing free from the asphalt as the localized gravity field inverted. The colossal machine floated upward, suspended in the air, weightless. But Izuku wasn't done. He couldn't just leave it floating. He activated matter transmutation. He pushed his will into the steel, visualizing the atomic structure, and commanded it to change. He didn't choose fire, or plasma, or anything destructive. He chose the most harmless, fragile state of matter he could imagine. The transformation started at his palms and rippled outward like a wave of blinding, prismatic light. The heavy, dark gray titanium armor of the robot began to shimmer. The hydraulic fluids, the electrical wires, the massive gears, they all rapidly lost their density, their colors shifting into translucent, iridescent hues. Down on the ground, Uraraka stopped struggling, her eyes wide with absolute, unfiltered awe. The deafening, mechanical roar of the zero-pointer ceased. High above the city, the 100-foot-tall weapon of mass destruction was gone. In its place, maintaining the exact shape of the robot for a split second, was a colossal, shimmering construct made entirely of soap bubbles. Then, the wind blew. The giant bubble robot lost its cohesion. Millions of smaller, iridescent bubbles broke apart, drifting gently down over the ruined cityscape. The sun caught the sheer volume of soapy spheres, casting a breathtaking array of rainbows across the battle center. It was silent. Completely, utterly silent. No explosion. No shrapnel. No concussive blast. Just the gentle, popping sound of bubbles landing on the asphalt. Izuku fell from the sky, the Quirks shutting down instantly as he slammed the mental vault door shut. He landed hard on the ground, rolling to absorb the impact. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, staring up at the sky filled with floating rainbows. His bracelets were smoking, the red lights flickering weakly before returning to a dim, exhausted green. His arms felt like they were filled with lead, and a sharp migraine pounded behind his eyes. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up. He looked over and saw Uraraka, still trapped beneath the rubble, staring at the bubbles falling around her. Izuku walked over to her. He didn't use a quirk. He just bent down, grabbed the edge of the massive concrete slab, and used the physical strength Tashinori had forced him to build. He heaved the slab up, throwing it aside with a heavy crash. He offered a trembling, scarred hand down to the girl. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked softly, his voice strained. Uraraka looked from his hand to his face, and then up at the sky where a giant robot had just been erased from existence, and turned into bath toys. She slowly took his hand. You just... I'm sorry," Izuku whispered, looking down at his shoes, entirely misinterpreting her shock. "I made a mess. The bubbles might make the ground a bit slippery." A loud, mechanical buzzer echoed across the entire battle center. "Time is up!" Present Mick's voice rang out. Izuku closed his eyes, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. He had survived. He hadn't hurt anyone. Back in the observation room, the silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Aizawa stood perfectly still, his glowing red eyes fading back to black. The file containing Izuku Midoriya's supposed quirk slipped from his fingers, scattering papers across the floor. He had just watched a child alter gravity and rewrite the fundamental laws of atomic matter simultaneously, turning thousands of tons of steel into water and soap without causing a single casualty. "Energy manipulation," Aizawa muttered, his voice hollow. "Right. Sure." President Mike swallowed loudly, pulling his sunglasses off entirely. He didn't just destroy it. He erased it. If he can do that to a robot, what could he do to a person? He could turn them into a mist of blood with a thought, Snipe said grimly, his hand instinctively resting on the holster of his gun. "That kid is a walking god." Niza steepled his paws together, resting his chin on them. His beady eyes were fixed intensely on the screen, watching Izuku gently help the injured girl walk toward the exit. "He is not a god, Snipe," Niza said softly, a profound sense of respect lacing his usually chipper tone. A god would have smashed the machine to prove his dominance, uncaring of the insects below him. A god would have sought glory. Niza looked around the room, meeting the terrified eyes of his staff. "Look at what he did," Nizu instructed. "He possessed the power to shatter the earth, and he chose to create soap bubbles to ensure the safety of one single applicant. He did not act out of arrogance. He acted out of a profound, agonizingly precise degree of restraint." Niza turned to Tashinori, who was leaning against the wall, a quiet, immensely proud smile hidden beneath his shadowed face. "All might," Niza hummed. "It seems we have a very interesting 4 years ahead of us." 1 week later, Izuku sat at his desk in his dimly lit bedroom. He was staring at a small, circular metal disc resting on his desk pad. The UA emblem was stamped on the top. Inko Midoriya paced nervously outside his door, wringing her hands, but Izuku had asked for a moment alone. He reached out and tapped the top of the disc. A holographic projection flickered to life, projecting onto the wall of his bedroom. Instead of a standard acceptance letter, the image of Nizu, the principal of UA, appeared in a high-backed leather chair. "Greetings, Izuku Midoriya." Nizu chirped merrily, taking a sip from a teacup. "I am recording this message personally, a rare occurrence, but given the unique nature of your application, I felt it necessary." Izuku sat up straight, his heart pounding in his chest. "You scored perfectly on the written exam, a commendable feat," Nizu continued. "However, the practical exam is where things became fascinating. You scored 0 points from direct combat destruction of the villain bots. Izuku's stomach plummeted. 0 points. He had failed. However, Nisa smiled, his eyes glinting. We have a hidden metric. Rescue points. Given by a panel of judges for acts of selflessness and heroism. For abandoning the objective to save applicant Achiko Uraraka, you were awarded 60 rescue points. Izuku gasped softly. But that is not all, Nisa said, setting his teacup down. His demeanor grew serious. UA is an institution that values heroes of all kinds. Not just the brawlers, but the tacticians. The surgeons. You incapacitated 25 villain bots through non-destructive, highly technical means. You displayed a level of environmental awareness and collateral damage mitigation that I have never seen in a student. For this, I have personally created a new category of scoring for you. Technical neutralization. A scoreboard materialized next to Nisa's head. Izuku Midoriya. Rescue points, 60. Technical neutralization points, 80. Total score, 140. You shattered the entrance exam record, Nisa smiled warmly. Your power is immense, Midoriya. But your heart, and your restraint, are even greater. Nisa pointed a paw directly at the camera. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your Hero Academia. The hologram fizzled and vanished, leaving Izuku sitting in the quiet dark of his room. He looked down at his scarred hands. He looked at the heavy bracelets on his wrists. For the first time in his 14 years of life, the tears that spilled from his eyes were not born of fear, or isolation, or the terror of his own biology. They were tears of absolute, unfiltered joy. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He had done it. He had walked through the fire, he had faced the infinite storm inside his mind, and he hadn't burned the world down. He was going to be a hero.